I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I have with me again Mario Canseco, and we're going to talk election because it ain't over yet.
It ain't over yet. We're still waiting for the final count. It's going to be tough to figure out a way in which the vote splits change the composition of the seats. It could still happen, of course, but it's definitely a closer election than what the NDP expected at the start of the campaign, and leaves us in a similar situation like the one we had in 2017. Who are the Greens going to support, and who's going to form a government, and how long is that government going to last?
Even right now, the Conservatives can claim, I guess, a major victory from going from 2 seats to 45 seats. That's a pretty big jump. And then obviously the NDP got a wake up call, right, from losing their majority down to where they might even lose the government, because there's 2 seats still in kind of contention, and there's 49,000 ballots to count. Do you have any idea which way those ballots lean?
It's tough to tell. There's an analysis that you could make as far as how do people vote in something like this, and if you look back at some of the past voting trends. But part of what happens is 2020 is a rarity because more than a third of voters decide to cast their ballots by mail. So it's tough to tell whether that voter is more likely to be supportive of the government or the opposition. I think it's an interesting campaign because when you have a result as close as this, everybody's going to point to specific things that could have made a difference. And for me, I think the argument that the NDP utilized in the final week of the campaign, which was to focus on Bruce Chapman in Surrey, to talk about how toxic some of his statements were, in an effort to try to get Surrey back into the win column, didn't actually materialize. He almost got 60% of the vote. They lost a lot of seats in Surrey that they required.
Yeah, Surrey was like a really big, like that one really shifted, right? And that's what Renee called that when I had Renee on, we were doing a live stream, and Renee said it was going to get decided in Surrey.
That's precisely what happened. I mean, I think they were expecting to lose some of the seats in the Fraser Valley. The way it worked was kind of strange because I think they were hoping to get the 2 Langley seats. I think they thought they were going to lose the third one, but they didn't get anything out of Langley. And that is why we have the result that we have. But ultimately, I think it's a campaign in which the focus on the makeup of the candidates as a way to try to question John Rostad didn't actually work. It's a completely different ball game. I think we're heading into a situation where a lot of the voters who are right now making their minds, especially those who are supportive of the Conservatives, don't look at what you said on social media in such a negative way as the same way we did back then 12 years ago.
Yeah, so they overplayed that card for sure. And you talked about that last time we talked, that card it's lost a lot of its mojo.
That is definitely part of it. And I think it was an interesting campaign on the part of the Conservatives. I think people were already sort of figuring out how to write this post-mortem, right? So, Rostad takes them too far, but maybe he was too radical, and then we need a change in leadership. Now he has to stay there for a while because, they still have a shot at forming the government, and they got to figure out where they go from here. And for Eby, I mean, if we had been in a situation where the Conservatives finish a little bit lower and the NDP gets to 50 seats, you don't have this reckoning of, wow, this is really close, this could have been very dangerous. Maybe we didn't run the best campaign that we could have run. And it essentially places the onus on the leadership as far as, do we do this again? If they can't form a government, this is going to happen in January or in February. But it's not the result that they expected. I think they definitely wanted to keep the split. We could argue that the absence of BC United helped the Conservatives in a way. And the independents ended up being a non-factor. Nobody's going to get close to 35% of the vote. So you're not going to win that seat.
Yeah. So the scenarios that could play out, right now it's 45-46, at 46 for the NDP. There's 2 seats really in contention that are, like less than 100 votes separating them. If they both go, because right now they're being held by the NDP, so that's the way that it's sitting. So if they go to the Conservatives, that would give the Conservatives 47 to the NDP's 44, right?
Yes.
And then 2 for the Greens.
What makes this complicated, you still have to appoint a speaker. So,
right.
I mean, the situation could be to put it in federal election terms, can you find a David Emerson in David Eby's caucus? Can you call somebody from
or
the NDP?
could you talk one of the Greens into taking that so they could have a microphone all the time?
That could be one of the options as well, but it's going to be very complicated. Part of what makes this difficult is just how sustainable this would be if the Greens are the ones that are buttressing your government. There might be something more in common with the NDP. And, in our exit poll, we asked people, should we just have a merger? And the level of support for a merger between the Conservatives and United is fairly low, partly because there's a lot of people trying to figure out just what United is anymore. But we do have a majority of NDP voters and practically half of Greens who say, I'm okay with a merger. Maybe this is the right way to go. If we unite and we can turn the NDP into a more environmentally friendly party, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, we did see, like, in Kelowna, which is typically a Conservative stronghold, Loyal Wooldridge almost won his seat. I mean, that one's really close too, and that recount could change that one as well. And I would say a lot of that is his brand, obviously, in this market, because he's a very popular Kelowna City Councillor candidate.
Well, I think that is something that was remarkable, the way in which well-known councillors performed. Amelia Boltby in Penticton, the kind of candidate that BC Liberals in the past would have fought for, decides to join the BC Conservatives, wins fairly handily, with many challenges from independents in her own riding. Similar situation happening in other jurisdictions, and it's a very young and, I would say, inexperienced crowd from both sides. You're going to have a lot of people who have never been in the legislature before. The NDP lost 5 cabinet ministers, so that's also a lot of brain trust that needs to be there. And there's decisions to be made. Even if the government lasts 3 weeks, you still have to figure out who you place in those ministries. And it's a significantly young crowd. I mean, Judy Darcy was on CTV with us on Saturday. She was telling us about the experience of 2017 where you couldn't even go to the bathroom because you never know if the government was going to be toppled in the next half hour. So that's the kind of situation they're going to be facing.
Lots of wrinkles, even with Sonia Furstenau losing her seat, right? Like that is, so what do they do there? Are they going to try and do a by-election to get her back in there, or is she going to just, ride off into the sunset?
Well, listening to her speech, that certainly seems to be the case. She was talking about passing the mantle to the next generation. Rob Botterill or Jeremy Valeriot would become the de facto leaders of the Greens. I don't see a scenario where they try to call a by-election so she can get back into this. But I think she's going to play a major role in the way in which these negotiations related to who the Greens support will go. It was also strange because, Andrew Weaver, who was the architect of the deal in 2017, comes out in support of the Conservative candidate in his riding, Stephen Andrew, the former CTV broadcaster, who ended up finishing in 3rd place. I don't think he's going to be invited into the negotiations. It doesn't seem like he and David Eby like each other too much. But it definitely shows the complexity of a scenario where the rise in support for the Greens, particularly because of Sonia Furstenau's personality, can get her over the finish line against Grace Lohr, but it certainly helps them in the other 2 seats that they won.
So it doesn't look like either way that this government will hold out for 4 years, I don't think. I mean, I think we're going to have an election fairly quickly. And I think, I mean, you tell me, would the independents then be kind of out of it because they've, kind of got their, message, and then they would probably not run?
Unless there's a different type of scenario where you assemble as a party. I think part of what was missing in the latter stages of BC United, instead of having all of these independents working by themselves in their own ridings, they could have assembled in some sort of bloc. I made the joke on Twitter that they could have called themselves the Bloc Colombois. We have 12, 15 people. Yeah. And that allows you to participate in debates. You could petition the consortium and say, I want to be part of this. We're 20 people. We need a centrist option. We're the party of whatever you want to call yourselves. And we want to participate. And that enables you to have a shot at winning. But when you have all of the independents saying things differently, similar things to the ones they were saying when they were BC United candidates, but it's a little bit disjointed. You don't have the party support behind you to get out the vote. That is part of what makes this more complicated for them. But if there's an appetite for whatever BC United used to be before Kevin Falcon decided to fold the tent. You do have an opportunity to do this. Now, it's going to be very problematic because of the results of the election. Your per vote stipend is significant. Now the Conservatives are on pretty much even footing with the NDP when it comes to funding. So the next election is going to be fought in a very different manner than what we just saw over the past few weeks.
Yeah, they were handing out the candy on both sides, and as we got near the wire, I imagine that would even step up even further. And I do, like David Eby did say, we need to listen to British Columbians. It's about time they start to listen, right? But I think both sides need to hear the voices and do better things for British Columbians as opposed to just mandate things.
Well, and it's definitely. There's places where you have the opportunity of a grand coalition. We've seen that happen in some German elections. Okay, so the Christian Democrats and the Socialists will be together for a couple of months, try to figure out some common ground, see if they can make this happen. I don't see something like this happening in this election because, and I think we saw precisely where this is going on Saturday night. Nobody gave a victory speech or a concession speech, but Rostad was very clear on, we're going to fight them all the way and we're going to make their lives miserable. Okay, that's the job of an opposition leader. And Eby saying, okay, we heard you, but part of me keeps thinking if they had gotten a couple of more seats, his speech would have been very different. So, part of this is also how do you sustain the type of momentum that can make people who looked at the Conservatives as an option for change look at you differently. It's going to be complicated.
Yeah, you had said when we did previous discussions that if the handoff would have been better between Falcon and Rustad, that we wouldn't even be talking about this, that the Conservatives would have had a majority and we wouldn't be in this predicament.
Well, when you look at specific ridings, I look at Vancouver Langara. That was Michael Lee's riding. It's a place that held on under the BC Liberals in 2020 in an election where they had their worst performance in history. And, they could have had a different candidate than the candidate that the Conservatives ran. There was talk about supplanting that candidate with somebody who was seeking to be the BC United contender after Michael Lee stepped down. That didn't happen. They ended up losing the seat. The results in the city of Vancouver are telling because the Conservatives hold on to only one seat, which is Colchena. The NDP does better than in any other election on that particular riding, which used to be Kevin Falcon's riding and Andrew Wilkinson's riding and Gordon Campbell's riding. So wow. This is the place where you run your leaders and the NDP finishes within 10 points. Very different situation in Surrey where the message of, this is a group of people who are very bad and John Rostad should have never endorsed this candidate. Not only did it not dent the level of support for Chapman, it didn't do anything for all the ridings around him.
Interesting. It's going to be interesting as we see how this plays out October 26th to 28th. Hopefully we get that answer sooner than later so we can move on to different things. Let's move on to a different topic. The federal election. Last time we talked, you said that we're probably going to have a spring election. Christy Clark just threw her hat in the ring. I think you expected that as well.
It's been talked about for a while now, and I think it was very interesting the way in which she said it. This isn't a job that is available, but if it's a job that becomes available, I'd be happy to play a role and try to see where this goes. I think part of what we're seeing is the way in which the media out of Toronto and Ottawa is covering this, because they weren't aware of the latter stages of the Clark government. So they look at this the same way we would look at something happening in Atlantic Canada from BC. Oh, this is a former premier and this is great. It's a little bit more complex, especially because this is a part of the country that has been significantly supportive of the federal Conservatives. We've had Pierre Poilievre at 50% federally in BC, which is not something that we've seen since 2000. And I don't think the presence of Christy Clark is going to necessarily bring the Liberal Party to a level that is similar to the one they had in 2015.
It would be more of a rebuilding, I think, because it seems like Pierre's got a runaway train there. And does Justin Trudeau, there was 30 MPs that brought a letter. Do you think that that's really going to sway him from stepping aside?
I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think he wants to continue to do this, but now there's other voices, but it's not the same type of situation that we had, for instance, when Paul Martin decided that it was time for him to to become prime minister. We're talking about Christy Clark, who's been idle from politics for years. We're talking about there's no cabinet minister raising his or her hand and saying, I want to be that person. So it makes you wonder, is this something where Christy Clark wants to be leader of the party, be prime minister for a few weeks, call an election, just to get her name on a list of people that includes John Turner and Kim Campbell? It's tough to tell.
I was going to say a Kim Campbell moment for her, but it also raises her profile, though, nationally, because, she's had a profile out here in Western Canada, but it would raise her profile. And I know she's on a speaking tour and stuff like that. So it does raise her brand awareness. So I don't think she would go into it thinking that the Liberals would win back government.
No, I think there's always a possibility, of course, and I think the wild card in that sense is what is going to happen after the foreign interference dust has settled. If there's something that is particularly unpalatable for Canadians coming from the Conservative caucus or from Pierre Poilievre himself, that could sway things. We've seen other elections where that type of revelation can change the way situations go, because it certainly would suggest that there's a problem there. And the fact that he refuses to get the security clearance and doesn't want to talk about this, the more that goes on, it's more fodder for the Liberals to say he doesn't have your best interest at heart. Now, has that made a dent in the public opinion polls at this stage? Not yet, but nobody has seen exactly what the whole kerfuffle is, and that is part of the complexity of the next election. If they have something on Pierre Poilievre or the Conservatives related to foreign interference, are they waiting for the right moment to put it in front of Canadians?
And then Saskatchewan, just any predictions for Saskatchewan? Their election here is at the end of the month.
We're going to be in field later this week. We like to do this up until the final stages. It's an interesting dilemma because we've seen the Saskatchewan party losing support in the urban areas. Regina, Saskatoon, they do very well in the rural parts of the province. There's a bunch of minor parties that could play a spoiler role depending on how well they do in some of the ridings. But it's a significantly different Saskatchewan party from the one that Brad Wall ran, which was essentially a juggernaut where you only had to figure out the size of the victory. It was almost like the Super Bowls of the 1980s.
Yeah,
it was about trying to figure out just how poorly the AFC teams were going to do. And this time it's different. I think the NDP has tried to run a significantly better campaign than in years past. Carla Beck had a good debate. There's a chance that this is going to be a little bit closer than before. But it's definitely tough to tell. I think, we got a little bit of an inclination after what happened in New Brunswick last night. We didn't poll there because it's really complicated to get the granularity for languages online. But it's suddenly when you have a liberal government, even though they weren't really talking about their federal cousins. Right. And I think it definitely raises the question for Scott Moe, do I want to continue discussing things related more to a culture war thing and not talk about the economy and jobs or healthcare? Because it didn't go well for Higgs in New Brunswick.
Right. And then let's look south of the border to wrap things up. That's the big one coming up here. It's not too far away, right? How many days we got there? November 4th, right? So
November 5th. It's on
November
Tuesday,
5th.
yeah.
There you go. That's not too far away, though, right?
No, there's just a couple of weeks left. The election is a couple of weeks from today. Our numbers have shown a significantly tight race developing in the three states that are necessary for the Democrats to hold on to power. They could lose Arizona. They could lose Arizona. They could lose Georgia. North Carolina might not be in play as much as it was a couple of months ago, but they need to hold on to Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And the leads are 1 or 2 points for Kamala Harris. The numbers at the national level continue to trend well. I think the big difference has been the significant motivation of women to vote for Kamala Harris, and also because of the situation related to reproduction rights. But it's still too close. And we saw this back in 2016. It doesn't matter if you win the popular vote unless you get the seats in the states where you require them. And I think this is going to be a challenge for the Democrats. It could be the kind of election night where we are still counting and trying to figure out things. It's not going to be as wacky as 2020 because not a lot of people are going to vote by mail in these three states. But it's not a cakewalk. I mean, a couple of months ago, right after the announcement, right after people realized that Joe Biden's not running again, Kamala Harris is climbing up the charts, and now it's looking significantly closer.
Yeah, Pennsylvania seems to be where they're really concentrating, and the Trump campaign, and with Elon Musk, they're spending a lot of time and money and energy there with this $1 million a day giveaway to get people to sign up for a petition to protect the First and Second Amendments. It's caused quite the stir out there.
It's been really interesting to watch because it has certain ramifications, particularly in the places where people might be more likely to vote for the Democrats. This isn't a campaign geared at getting people in rural areas, which are usually more Republican. This is certainly suggesting to some of the Democrats, think about it twice. This may not be where you want to go. And it's the kind of messaging that can help. The fact that we're not having another debate, we had 3 back in 2012 between Romney and Obama. It's usually more than one. We could argue that we had 2 because the first one was, Biden versus Trump, and that is when the Democrats decided that they needed to do something about their possible nominee. We didn't have a second debate, so it's basically just rehashing of the phrases. One thing that really stuck with me when we did our first poll was that the low level of undecideds. And there's not a lot of people who you're fighting for, but a lot of these undecideds are independent voters, and they're still trying to figure out if they want to go with Kamala Harris or if they want to go back to Trump. And that is the group that is trying to be courted by Elon Musk and also by the Democrats. There's we'll see what the next week or 2 bring us. We've always heard about the October surprise in the United States. Let's see if we have one in the next few days.
The endorsements that are coming out seem to be ramping up a bit too, and how much do you think endorsements play a role? Like Elon Musk, obviously a huge audience, like on X alone, he has 200 million followers. And then there's quite a few other people that surprisingly are now coming out in support of Donald Trump.
Well, and I think it's a way to counter the possible effect of the Taylor Swift endorsement for Kamala Harris. I don't think it's going to matter that much. I think it helps people see or realize who their favorite celebrities or personalities might be supporting. I don't think it necessarily moves somebody one way or the other, especially in a scenario as entrenched as that one. But I think it can play a role, especially when you're thinking about the Senate. One thing that is interesting about Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin is that you have Senate races as well. And if somebody can get past the finish line, let's say if the Republicans can win some of those seats, that could also play a role in the turnout that defines whether the Senate is also going to be more Republican leaning. That is part of the issue here.
Yeah, they're all really.
There's going to be decisions.
All 3 of those levels of government are very tight, right? Congress, the Senate, and the presidency. It's very, very tight.
Well, and it certainly makes things more complicated for whoever becomes the president. They're going to inherit a Senate that is going to be divided, maybe a House where they don't have control. It's going to be something that has to be done on a case-by-case basis, on a policy-by-policy basis in a way. And it's not going to be simple, but I think that we've seen Trump doubling down on some of the messaging, the types of words that he's using, the types of anecdotes that he's talking about in his rallies, which seems to be very different from the way Kamala Harris has been approaching it. And still, even with a situation like that, we have a statistical tie.
They're handing out the candy pretty good down there too. Some of the stuff would be good up here. No tax on tips, but they both adopted now. And then no tax on overtime, which would be a great one to incentivize people to work overtime. And then, there's no, you'd be able to write off your interest on car loans and, housing grants, all kinds of stuff. I mean, they're really doling out the cash. And then I saw an interview where they're going to get all this money to pay for it. But obviously the U.S. can print money as much as it wants, it seems like.
Well, I think that's the problem with having elections so close to Halloween. and you have, $50,000 for any small business. That was Kamala Harris's main pitch during the debate. But we ended up the next 4 days talking about edible pets. So you never know.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and then it seems like campaigning against their own record sometimes too, right? It seems it's hard to get an answer, and I guess we'll see how not talking to the media really plays out too. We've seen that it kind of worked here in BC with some of the Conservative candidates not talking to the media, and just I think they got more so relying on Pierre Poilievre's brand. I think, again, we talked about that stars aligning, but is the media becoming less relevant in some of those things too? Like how is that playing out? Like, it seems to be working in some instances though.
One thing that we've tracked since 2016 is where are you getting your news from? And with the echo chamber isn't something that is happening over the past 6 months. Even in 2016, we saw the Hillary voter more likely to be watching CNN or MSNBC, and the Trump voter more likely to be watching Fox News. And we continue to see something like that happening here. There's a very tiny minority of people who watch the so-called liberal media who would vote for Trump, and an even smaller proportion of those who watch Fox News who would vote for Kamala Harris. It's part of the situation. It's not, I think it has more to do with the way in which the media has been covering things. And the onus on a specific candidate that you're criticizing. Part of what happened when we had the final stages of 2016 and, okay, we need to talk about Hillary's emails because we've been talking about Trump's tapes for so long. The illusion of parity based on trying to create a false equivalency between the things that the two candidates have been doing. And that is part of what is making people more mistrustful of the media. Are you doing this because this is something that is in my interest, or are you doing this because you are the one who wants to steer me one way or the other? But Americans have been doing that for the past 3 election cycles, and it's still going.
The difference between Canada and the U.S., though, the U.S. has, the left-leaning media, the CNNs, and then the Fox on the right. What Canada really doesn't have, like a Fox News up here. Like, we don't really have like a national right-leaning media.
Well, I think that is also part of the complexity. You can find some of those center-right or right-minded voices in other areas, in other publications. It's tough to tell because part of what we have is an insistence, particularly on the part of the CBC, to try to cover the whole country in a way that is more meaningful, and it's not always that easy. I mean, you look at the ratings, particularly for some of the local stations, and they're not there. People are watching other things, and if you're supposed to be covering the whole country as a whole, as one, it's something that is very difficult to do.
Yeah, interesting. I did an interview recently with CBC, and the reporter was very worried that Pierre Poilievre wins and he doesn't have a job. And then for us, we can't wait for a change of government because we get no funding from the government, and we just want our Instagram and our Facebook back. So it's kind of odd that media is so reliant on the outcome of government here, and to me, it says that government should get out of media, like leave media alone.
Well, and that is also something that has to be discussed once we have a new government, or if the government that we have right now federally is re-elected. Is this something that you want to get into? Is it the responsibility of the government to try to fund a media outlet, any media outlet, because the situation has been struggling? I don't see a scenario where, for the sake of argument, the government stands in to save the national brotherhood of milk deliverers who come to your house on a horse-drawn carriage. Things change, things evolve, and there's ways in which the media has to figure out how to do these things. It's not something that can be resolved because the government decides to step in and give you money.
I watched that hearing with the CTV boss there, trying to defend the 2 reporters that were caught altering video to make Pierre Poilievre look bad, and then just trying to be evasive on how much funding that the CTV network gets. I think they should be very transparent with what they get, and possibly that the best answer is there should be no funding for any media. Saying that as media,
it's the way in which it worked for such a long time. I think this is part of a natural evolution of things. When I was doing my Master of Journalism at UBC. The prevailing argument was the media will be here forever. We need to be prepared to be, and at the time, the biggest conglomerate was CanWest Global. And, we were told you're going to have to look great on camera and you have to speak well because you never know if your story is going to be picked on radio or print or television because this CanWest juggernaut is going to be here forever. It was 20 years ago. It wasn't 70 years ago. This is the way things evolve.
Yeah, we see like in the States, definitely a lot of personalities that have gone, once they've left networks, have been actually exploded onto the, like the internet with, the different streamings, X and YouTube and all that kind of stuff, and have made themselves probably a lot, like a bigger audience and making more money too with less constraint.
Well, one thing that is fascinating to watch is the generational breakdown. You still have the over 55s turning on their television. They want to watch the news at 6 in the United States, or they want to watch the news at 11 in Canada. Generation X, because we grew up in the early stages of the internet, we're a little more cautious. Maybe you don't want to spend money, maybe you don't want to subscribe. But the younger generation, they say, if I have to pay $8 a month to have access to this content, I'm going to do it. And that's the generation that is going to change things. They have no problem looking at their bills at the end of the month and saying, I spent $200 on subscriptions to things that I care about. I want to be listening to this blogger. I want to be talking about this particular commentator. I want to be following what they say. They don't mind. But you try to sell that idea to somebody over 55 and say, you're going to have to pay $200 a month to have access to this content. No, I'd rather keep my cable TV.
Yeah. We're toying with the idea of doing a live stream on the night of the election, Renee Merrifield and I. So we may do that because I think it's going to be like, that affects the world too, right? That election, whoever governs that country, the most powerful country in the world, economically and militarily and all kinds of stuff, and the U.S. dollar, it definitely plays a big role in the lives of everybody around the globe.
I remember the first election that I experienced in Canada, the first American election, was 2000. And you had to go to CNN. There was no live coverage. There was no live stream. There was just a mention on the national news that, Florida is sort of too close to call. It's grown in importance, and it should. We share a border. We have a significant amount of trade between us. And whatever happens affects us. If Donald Trump wins and he wants to renegotiate whatever is left of NAFTA, it changes things. And Canadians really like to believe that the Republicans are the worst party ever, but the Democrats are significantly more protectionist. So there's going to be complications regardless of who wins.
Yeah, I think we're still their biggest trading partner, but they're not. Mexico's now. Do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of flipped. So we used to be their biggest trading partner. It's only one-sided now, right? So, so it's interesting to see how that plays out, especially with the way that the Liberal government has been very antagonistic towards Donald Trump. And if he wins, I don't think it's going to go well for Canada until there's a change in government as well.
Well, and that's the other thing. I think the Liberals at the federal level, deep down, are thinking it might be more expedient for us from a political standpoint if Trump wins. We can just say, look, we need somebody to stand up to Trump. Do you really want Poilievre to stand up to Trump? He won't stand up to Trump. I have a feeling they have that campaign figured out if Trump wins. If he doesn't, then we go back to square one.
Okay, well, I've kept you long enough today, I think. So I think we'll reach out when we're ready to do the U.S. election. I know you'll be busy. Are you going down to the States during that time, or?
No, we're going to be doing everything from here. Everything from here. It's the beauty of online research. You just got to find the respondents and ask them how they feel about stuff. Toughest part has been finding undecided respondents. Everybody has an opinion about this one.
There's lots of interesting stuff on the internet for sure with that election. There's a lot of good stuff. The McDonald's thing caused quite the stir too, right?
Oh, that was fun. Notice I was more taken aback by his comments about Arnold Palmer, but that's something that should only be checked after midnight, I guess.
I never did get to hear that. A lot of people have told me about it, but I didn't hear that. But I sometimes I just don't think that he, checks what he's saying, right? So obviously, and I think Elon Musk has that same problem, right? He just puts it out there and goes with it, right? So, but
it's a stream of consciousness thing. He starts talking about one thing. He calls it the weave, but it's probably not the best way to do political speeches.
I think it hurts for sure. Like when you say things, because it stops people from listening sometimes, right? You know what I mean? When you say, because they focus on that and they don't focus on any of the other stuff. They stay with that, and then it causes like the media down there to lose their minds too, right? So
exactly.
Maybe it's good sound bites, right? It's good
you
sound
don't
bites.
Get the desired effect.
Good entertainment. Maybe that's what the whole thing is all about.
Completely.
Anyway, I thank you for your time again today, and we
My
look forward to
pleasure,
talking
Jim.
again. Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you
Bye.
from Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.